Dennis Fowler wanted the chair by the window, and Clifford Nash, a quiet widower halfway through a turkey sandwich he had packed that morning in a paper bag, told him it was taken. Fowler called it a restricted area. He had Nash walked out of the building by a young security guard who did not know what he was doing and looked like he knew it. Nobody in the medical day unit waiting area said a word. What Fowler did not know was that the man he had just escorted into a February parking lot had been sworn in as Deputy Minister of Health for the province of Ontario 11 days earlier and had come to Harwick specifically to investigate him. The government vehicle left Barrie at 11 in the morning. The Subaru Outback that pulled into Harwick Memorial's parking lot at 9:30 had a cracked windshield and a Tim Hortons cup in the cup holder from 300 kilometers back. The man driving it wore a plaid shirt under a fleece vest and boots that had been waterproofed so many times the leather had gone gray at the toes. He carried no ministry identification beyond a driver's license. His phone was in his vest pocket, set to silent. His name was Clifford Nash, and 11 days earlier, in a Queen's Park meeting room with the blinds drawn against the November light, he had been sworn in as Deputy Minister of Health for the province of Ontario. The appointment had not been announced publicly. Nash's chief of staff had argued for a press release, for at least a note to the regional health authorities so they could prepare. Nash had sat with his hands flat on the table and listened to all of it, and then asked how many site visits had been conducted at Harwick Memorial Hospital in the last 16 years. The answer was none. He had said that answered the question about announcements. They settled on 2 conditions. He would check in with Manon, his assistant, every 90 minutes, and a 2-person ministry staff team would wait at the regional office in Barrie, 40 minutes up the highway. Close enough to reach him, far enough that no government plates would appear in Harwick overnight and give anyone reason to straighten their files. Nash had agreed to the team the way a man agrees to a life jacket on a calm lake. He had spent 23 years in provincial health administration before the deputy minister posting. He had reviewed complaint files from 42 hospitals. He had read the 6 Harwick letters in the same week they arrived at his office, all of them describing the same administrator in language so similar that the analyst who flagged the bundle had written one word at the top of the file: pattern. Every one of those 6 letters ended at the same name. Dennis Fowler had run Harwick Memorial for 16 years. Before that, he had been assistant administrator under a man named Gerald Pierce, who had hired him straight from his MBA and who considered unquestioned institutional authority the highest form of order. Pierce retired in 2008 and left Fowler everything, including a culture that had never once been tested from the outside. Fowler was 59, trim in a way that looked maintained, and he wore his hospital lanyard even on weekends. He had never received a failing performance review, because no one from the ministry had ever sat in a chair in his building without calling ahead first. The 6 complaint letters had sat in a ministry inbox for 14 months before Nash read them. He pulled into Harwick Memorial's lot at 9:28 and sat for a moment with the engine off. The building was 3 stories of sandy brick with a covered entrance and a flag that moved stiffly in the February wind. He counted 6 administrative vehicles near the side entrance with reserved permits. He noted the walk-in clinic hours posted on the board near the main door and saw they had been reduced by 4 hours since the last public notice on the ministry website. He got out, tucked the paper bag under his arm, and walked into a building where nobody had any particular reason to look at him. The woman at the reception desk glanced up, registered a man in a fleece vest, and looked back at her screen. Her name tag read Janet. Nash told her he was waiting for a scheduled consultation in the medical day unit, which was true in the sense that he had scheduled the visit himself, and the consultation would happen whether or not anyone in the building knew it was coming. Janet pointed him down the left corridor without looking up again. He thanked her and went. The medical day unit waiting area had 12 chairs arranged around 2 low tables with magazines from the previous autumn. A television on the wall played a morning program with the sound turned off. The chair Nash chose was the second from the window, facing the corridor, which gave him a clean sightline to the nursing station and to a whiteboard mounted outside the consultation rooms that read, in blue marker, wait time, 45 min. He ate half his sandwich. He watched. A patient was moved past the closed door of room C without anyone explaining where she was going. The whiteboard, which he checked twice in the 40 minutes he sat there, did not change. A nurse with a short gray braid, her name tag read Colleen, moved between the station and the rooms with the efficiency of someone who had worked the same floor for a long time and had stopped expecting much from above. She glanced at Nash once, looked away, and did not look back. At 10:41, the door at the far end of the corridor opened and Dennis Fowler walked in. He came the way men come when they are accustomed to rooms adjusting around them. Lanyard moving, shoes sharp on the tile, voice already going before he reached the desk. He said something to Janet through the reception window that made her straighten. He nodded to a pharmaceutical representative. Nash had clocked sitting near the vending machines. He worked the corridor the way a politician works a reception. A word here, a question about someone's family there, and Nash understood in the first 2 minutes why 16 years of complaints had never produced a single formal review. The man was not cold. He was warm. That was the harder problem. Then Fowler reached the waiting area and stopped, because there was a stranger in the chair by the window. Colleen saw it first. Nash watched her hand still on the folder she was holding, watched her take one step toward the corridor, and then not take the second. She turned instead toward the nursing station and stood there with her back to the room, and that told Nash more about Harwick Memorial than the 6 letters had. Fowler crossed to the waiting area without appearing to hurry. He stood at the edge of the seating arrangement and looked down at Nash with an expression that was almost collegial. "Good morning," he said. "Are you here for a scheduled appointment?" Nash said good morning and said he was waiting. Fowler nodded slowly, the way a man nods when he has already decided what comes next. He said that unfortunately this particular area was designated for pre-registered day unit patients and their immediate family, that there had been some confusion at the front desk, and that he would be happy to have Nash redirected to the main lobby, where there was seating and coffee. Nash looked up at him and said he had been directed here by the front desk, that he had been seated for 40 minutes without issue, and that he intended to stay where he was until his matter was resolved. He said it without edge, like a man giving a weather report. Fowler's expression held, but his weight shifted. He said that he understood, and that the front desk had made an error, and that the area was not appropriate for general visitors. He said the main lobby was more comfortable. Nash said that if the area had a sign indicating it was restricted, he had not been able to find one, and that he had not been made uncomfortable in the 40 minutes he had been sitting in it. Behind the nursing station, Colleen had stopped moving entirely. "Sir," Fowler's voice dropped half a register, not threatening but delivered with the precision of a man who has never needed to raise it. "I am going to need you to gather your things." Nash asked politely whether that was a request or a direction, and on what basis. That was the sentence that changed everything. Not the refusal, the question. Fowler turned to the pharmaceutical rep first, which was the tell. A man acting on policy does not check his audience. He announced, at a volume that carried to the nursing station and to the man in the wheelchair near the far window, that this individual had refused a reasonable request from the hospital administrator, that he had no way to verify why a member of the public was sitting in a clinical area observing staff for 40+ minutes, and that he was now asking security to assist. He said the word safety. He said it twice, and the second time he said it, Nash could see Fowler had already made it true in his own mind. Nash set the paper bag on the chair beside him. He put both hands on his knees where everyone in the room could see them. He said clearly that he was not refusing to identify himself, that his wallet was in his left vest pocket, and that he had no intention of making this difficult. Every person in that waiting area would remember the sentence later, almost word for word. Fowler said he would wait while Nash gathered his things. The security guard who arrived 2 minutes later was young, 25, maybe 27, with a name tag that read to Tyler. He stood at the edge of the seating area and looked at the man in the fleece vest, then at the administrator, then at the floor. Nash read the discomfort in him immediately. Tyler said that he was going to need to ask Nash to come with him to the main lobby. Nash asked whether he was being asked to go to the lobby or leave the building. Tyler looked at Fowler. Fowler said the building. Nash stood. He picked up the paper bag and his coffee cup. He did not say who he was. He could have said his name and his title and watched Fowler's face change right there between the whiteboard and the medication dispensary before the pharmaceutical rep had time to pretend he was not watching. Every instinct from 2 decades in this system told him to end it now, that a deputy minister of the Crown being escorted out of a provincial hospital was not a minor administrative matter. But he had come here because of 6 letters. Because 6 people had described the same experience in language so similar that an analyst had used one word for all of it, and every one of those people had stood in a hallway in this building, with no title to say out loud and no ministry behind them. Reports written by people who have never been made to wait in a cold parking lot tend to assume the forms were already sufficient. He had said something close to that in a conference room in Toronto, and everyone had nodded and nobody had understood him. He understood himself now. So he handed Tyler his coffee cup. Tyler, not knowing what else to do, took it and walked toward the exit. The corridor was not long. In the 40 seconds it took to walk it, Nash noted 3 things. First, Colleen had come around the nursing station and was standing in the corridor entrance with a folder held in both hands, her jaw set. Second, the pharmaceutical rep had his phone face down on the table and was looking at the vending machine. Third, the man in the wheelchair by the far window. Nash put him at 70 or older, with a hospital bracelet on his wrist and a blanket across his knees, had watched the entire exchange and did not look away when Nash passed him. He shook his head once, slowly, like a man who has seen this particular thing before and had stopped being surprised by it. The automatic doors opened and Clifford Nash walked out into February. The cold settled in immediately, the dry, flat cold of a southern Ontario February that does not bite so much as insist. The parking lot was half full. His Subaru was at the far end. He stood on the cleared section of sidewalk with his paper bag and looked at the building. He took out his phone. 3 missed calls from Manon, 1 from the deputy chief of staff. He did not call back. He put the phone in his pocket and stood there. He was not angry. He had expected to be by now, and he was not. What he felt was closer to recognition, the distance between what a complaint file says and what a complaint file can actually hold. Those 6 letters had described a man who moved through this building like a feature of the landscape, something the staff and patients had learned to navigate the way you navigate a broken step you have memorized. The letters had described it, but a description is not the same as standing in a parking lot in February because you asked a reasonable question and declined to stop asking it. He was still standing there at 11:18 when the 2 gray ministry vehicles came in off the highway access road. They had no sirens. They did not need them. They pulled in at a pace that was not quite urgency and not quite routine, and parked side by side near the main entrance, and the 4 people who got out wore dark coats and ministry lanyards and moved with the particular economy of people who have arrived at a place they have been preparing to arrive at for some time. Renee Thibault crossed the parking lot to him first, director of hospital standards, and she had been in this job long enough that her expression when she reached Nash told him very little about what she was thinking. She asked whether he was all right. He said he was fine. She said her team was ready to enter. He said, not yet. She stopped. Nash said he wanted the parking lot and exterior documented before anything inside changed. He wanted photographs of the entrance board, the reduced clinic hours posting. He wanted the parking permit distribution near the side entrance on record. He wanted the security guard's account taken while the events were still immediate. He wanted the nursing staff approached before Fowler had the opportunity to speak to them privately. And he said he wanted Dennis Fowler brought out here to this parking lot before anyone entered the building on ministerial authority. Renee looked at him for a moment. Then she got on her phone. Bruno Asselin, the other senior official, a compact man with a notebook already open, was the one who went inside and said the sentence that ended it. He said it in the lobby, in front of Janet at the reception desk, in front of the pharmaceutical rep who had found a reason to extend his visit, in front of Tyler Beaumont, who was standing near the main desk with Nash's coffee cup still in his hand. He said, The man your administrator had escorted from this building is Clifford Nash, sworn in 11 days ago as Deputy Minister of Health for the province of Ontario. He is here under ministerial authority. This building is now under ministry review." The lobby went still. Not quiet, still. The difference between quiet and still is that quiet is the absence of sound. Still is the presence of understanding arriving all at once in a space, and nobody in it wanting to be the first to say it out loud. Janet's hand stopped on her keyboard. Dennis Fowler, who had come to the lobby when paged, because he considered a ministry visit a form of endorsement, stood with his lanyard swinging from its own last movement, and his face did the thing Nash was not in the room to see, but would later watch on the exterior camera footage. The color left it in stages from the top down, the way a window fogs in reverse. Fowler said that was not possible. Bruno said it was. Fowler said the man had given no indication whatsoever. Bruno said the deputy minister had stated clearly, in front of multiple witnesses, that his identification was in his vest's pocket. He said no one had checked. The lobby heard that sentence and held it. Colleen, who had followed the situation to the corridor entrance again, put one hand over her mouth and kept it there. Nash came in from the parking lot 14 minutes later, after the exterior documentation was complete. He did not hurry. He nodded to Renee. He looked at Fowler. He said nothing because nothing needed to be said yet, and the room knew it. The review took 6 days. The whiteboard in the consultation corridor that read wait time. 45 min had been showing that same number. Colleen confirmed in her statement, for the 3 hours preceding Nash's arrival. The actual average wait for patients in the unit that morning was 97 minutes. The board was updated once at the start of each shift and left. It was not a clerical oversight. It was a practice. Nobody above Colleen had ever asked why the number never moved. The reduced clinic hours had not been reported to the ministry. They had been changed in the internal scheduling system 9 months earlier, following a staffing dispute that Fowler had resolved by cutting hours rather than addressing the underlying complaint. The staff member who had originally raised that concern had received 2 disciplinary notations in her personnel file. Both were found, on review, to have been entered with falsified timestamps. The 6 complaint letters in the ministry file had each received a written response. Every response had been drafted in Fowler's administrative office, signed by Fowler, and stated that the concerns had been investigated and addressed internally. In 3 of the 6 cases, no investigation file of any kind existed. In 5 of the 6, the complainant had received no follow-up contact from the hospital at all. One of the 6 complainants was the man in the wheelchair. Ray Willett, 71, had come in that morning for a routine blood draw booked at 9:15. When Nash walked past him in the corridor, Ray had been waiting 2 hours and 40 minutes with no explanation. He had a letter in the ministry file dated 14 months earlier describing, in careful and specific language, almost exactly what was happening to him that morning. Ray had 40 seconds of video on his phone. He had recorded it from his wheelchair when Fowler first raised his voice at the waiting area. He brought it to Bruno himself, standing in the corridor with his hospital bracelet still on, and said he had been sitting on it since it happened and wasn't sure it was his business to give to anyone. Bruno told him it was everyone's business. Fowler made 4 phone calls from the parking lot while the ministry team worked inside. The first was to the hospital board chair, who listened for 60 seconds and said he would need to consult legal counsel before commenting. The second was to a ministry contact he had cultivated over 8 years of conference attendance, who told him he was unable to be involved and ended the call in under 30 seconds. The third was to his wife, who said she was going to her sister's. The fourth number he dialed and then canceled before it connected, because there wasn't one left that made sense to call. He stood in the same stretch of parking lot where Nash had stood and understood, slowly and very precisely, what it felt like to be in an open space with nothing to say and nobody coming. Nash met with him on the afternoon of the 3rd day in the small conference room the ministry team had commandeered, with Renee and a ministry legal advisor present, and Fowler's own lawyer seated beside him. Nash said at the outset that he was asking no questions, that anything said would be noted, and that Fowler was free to end the meeting at any word. Fowler spoke anyway. He said he had built this hospital's operational reputation from the ground up. He said the infection rates were among the lowest in the region. He said he had managed a pandemic with a staff that was chronically understaffed and had not closed a single patient care unit. He said all of it flatly, like a man reading from a document he has been composing in his head for 3 days. Nash told him that every word of it was in the file, and that it would go to the oversight panel along with everything else. Fowler said that none of this would have happened if Nash had simply moved to the lobby. Nash said that people always believe the collapse began on the day someone finally caught them, and that it never does. He said that 3 patients had been transferred out of the unit in the past year under documentation that did not support the stated medical rationale. He said 2 staff personnel files had entries with falsified dates. He said 6 complaint letters had received responses describing investigations that had not taken place. He said, Ray Ouellette wrote a letter to the ministry 14 months ago. He was sitting in your waiting area this morning for 2 hours and 40 minutes, and your whiteboard said 45 minutes. That was true before I walked in, and it would have been true the following Tuesday, and the Tuesday after that. He said, you didn't make a mistake when you called security. You made the mistake every day you signed a response to a complaint and filed it without opening a folder. This morning only made it possible to see. Fowler looked at the table. His lawyer put a hand on the arm of his chair. The meeting ended. The formal findings came out 3 weeks later. 14 compliance failures across 4 categories: patient documentation, complaint handling, staffing records, and public reporting. The hospital board accepted the ministry's administrative order. Fowler was placed on administrative leave effective the date of the order. The board chair read the notice to him over the phone and did not ask how he was. Tyler gave a full voluntary statement. He said he had known from the moment he was called to the waiting area that something was wrong, that the administrator had given him no policy basis for the escort, and that the man he had walked out had been nothing but composed throughout. He said he had held onto a paper coffee cup for 23 minutes afterward because he did not know what else to do with it, and putting it down had felt like admitting something. The statement went into the record. Tyler kept his position. When the hospital's new patient liaison protocols were being drafted several months later, and the committee asked for frontline staff input, Tyler submitted the first written response. Colleen's statement ran to 8 pages. Most of it was about the whiteboard. She had been documenting the gap between the posted wait time and the actual wait time in a personal notebook for 4 months. Because she had submitted a concern through internal channels the previous July and been told it was under review. And she had heard nothing since. She had not known who to give the notebook to. She gave it to Bruno the afternoon of the first day, standing at the nursing station, and when he asked her why she had kept it, she said she had not known what else to do with what she was seeing. The notebook became a central exhibit. Colleen received a formal written acknowledgement from the ministry within 3 weeks, which she folded and put in the pocket of her scrubs for a day before she decided what to do with it. Ray Ouellette went home that afternoon with his blood work done. 14 months after his letter to the ministry, a complaints officer called him to say his file had been formally reviewed and to ask whether he had additional information he would like included. He talked for an hour. After he hung up, he called his daughter and said that something had actually happened. She said she would believe it when the signage in the waiting room changed. The signage changed within 6 weeks. She did not say anything about it, but she drove past the hospital twice on the way home from work the day the new patient information board went up, which Ray found out about later and did not tell her he knew. Harwick did not celebrate. That was the part no one in the ministry offices quite understood when they read the summary report. There was no civic gathering, no moment of collective relief. The Tim Hortons on Maple Street was still full at 7 in the morning. The ice in the parking lot melted and refroze, and the maintenance crew sanded it again. Because Dennis Fowler was not the only person the review exposed. The hospital board had received complaint summaries annually for 16 years, and had accepted Fowler's verbal assurances at every meeting without asking for the underlying files. The ministry's own regional oversight structure had produced 0 site visits across the same 16-year span. a finding the ministry included in its own report about itself, which cost 3 senior staff their portfolio positions and prompted the deputy minister before Nash to submit his resignation by email on a Saturday afternoon. Colleen had been working 3 meters from a broken system for 4 months with a notebook, and no one authorized to receive it. Tyler had escorted a man out of a building because his employer told him to, and then stood in a corridor, holding a coffee cup and knowing it was wrong. Every person who had been in that waiting area that morning had registered what happened and gone back to their appointment, their rounds, their waiting, because a stranger's difficult morning costs you nothing, and 16 years of consequences can cost you everything. They were sitting in their kitchens now with a different arithmetic in front of them, and the sum was not the same as it used to be. They did not talk about it openly, but they were not calculating it the same way either. Nash returned to Harwick Memorial on a Thursday morning, 3 weeks after the day he first arrived. He came in the same Subaru with the same cracked windshield, wearing the same fleece vest. He had not put on a suit for it. Renee had suggested a suit. He had said no, and she understood why before he finished saying it. He came in through the main entrance at 9:45. Janet looked up from the reception desk and then kept looking. From the nursing station, Colleen saw him through the corridor window and stopped mid-step. The waiting area had 8 people in it. By the time Nash had reached the 3rd chair, 6 of them had risen. None of them said his title. Nobody said deputy minister. They stood the way people stand when words feel insufficient, and standing is the only thing left that means something. Nash understood exactly what it was, because it was not for the office he held. It was for 11 minutes in a parking lot in February. He nodded to the room once and sat in the 2nd chair from the window. Colleen brought coffee before he asked for it. Her hand was not entirely steady. She stood at the edge of the seating area with the pot and told him that she had been 4 feet from that chair, holding that same coffee pot the morning it happened, and had not taken the 2nd step, and that she thought about it now every time she came around the nursing station. He told her she had kept a notebook for 4 months with nowhere to send it, that she had handed it over on the 1st afternoon, and that it was in the evidentiary record. He told her she had done more that morning, and in the months before it, than anyone else in the building. Colleen went back behind the nursing station and did not come out for a while. Nash ate through the rest of his visit without ceremony. Through the window he could see the entrance board where the clinic hours had been corrected. The whiteboard outside the consultation rooms read wait time, 25 min. He watched it. At 10:10, a nurse updated it to 20 min. At 10:20, she updated it again to 15 min, each time accurately, each time without being reminded. At 11:47, Tyler came in from the side entrance, saw Nash through the corridor window, and walked the full length of the hallway to stop in front of him. He said he was glad Nash had come back. Nash shook his hand. He said Tyler had done something important on a morning when it was not easy to do it, and that the ministry knew it. Tyler said he had just gone and gotten the door. Nash said that sometimes that is the whole thing, and that it depends entirely on which door. He paid at the reception desk on his way out. He left nothing behind and made no speech, and nobody asked him for one. The doors opened and the February air came in, milder now. The particular mid-morning mild that in Ontario means the worst of the season has quietly decided to be somewhere else. Renee was waiting by her vehicle. She asked how it looked. Nash said it looked like something that might hold. She said the next file was ready. He said he knew. The Subaru went out through the parking lot and onto the access road and north toward the highway, and Harwick Memorial Hospital went on with its morning. The waiting area filled, and the whiteboard changed, and Colleen updated the numbers every 15 minutes, not because anyone was watching, but because she had decided some time ago that the watching was not the point. Ray Ouellette's follow-up appointment was on the books for the following week, and when he arrived, someone at the front desk said his name before he gave it, because it was on the screen, and it had been flagged for priority service, and that was a small and entirely ordinary thing that had not been true the last time he was there. A system does not fail all at once. It fails in corridors, in forms filed and never followed, in complaint letters answered but never opened. It holds together through the patience of the people inside it who keep doing their jobs carefully in buildings that have stopped rewarding them for it, and it holds until the morning someone sits down in a chair and declines, politely and without particular drama, to get up. Even then it does not fall. It becomes visible. What was always there simply becomes impossible to right around any longer. Dennis Fowler was not a dishonest man in the way that word is usually meant. He was a man who had been told for 16 years that what he called administration was the same thing as what the people in his waiting room called care. And he had believed it because no one with the authority to say otherwise had ever sat in one of his chairs long enough to feel the difference. Clifford Nash drove back toward the city with the heat on and the radio off and thought about Ray Ouellette, and about the notebook Colleen had kept for 4 months with nowhere to send it, and about Tyler standing in a corridor with someone else's coffee cup, not knowing what to put it down meant. He thought about what it costs a person to do the right thing inside a building that has decided the right thing is not worth the disruption. He thought about how long that cost compounds before anyone comes to count it. Then he merged onto the highway, and the city came up ahead of him through the winter light, and there were 5 more hospitals in the file, and the next one was already waiting.